So how can you participate? We have a few important dates. There's a deadline for the sign-up, which is the day before. It's next Tuesday. And then we have the case launch, which is Wednesday next week. And then you will have 24 hours together with your group of 4 to solve this real-life business case. Then we, together with Boston Consulting Group, Thursday, will find the 5 finalists that will come to the finals on Friday next week.
So some of you might still be thinking, well, why should you participate? We believe that Beat the Lead distinguishes itself from any other case competition by providing you a real-life learning opportunity. What we do is, first of all, to give you a toolbox where we give you some tips and tricks, and guidelines on how you actually solve a case. It includes how you develop a hypothesis, what's the key trends in some of the main industries, etc. This is a toolbox that you can get access to on our Facebook page. Secondly, we provide feedback to every single team participating in the Beat the Lead case competition. This means that regardless of whether you reach the finals, you'll make sure that you got something out of it. You'll learn what did you do well and what can you improve on for the next time. And I think this is something we're all asking for and wanting CBS to improve on. And thirdly, of course, we have the prizes. You'll have the opportunity to spend a day with senior management in one of our preferred partner companies, as listed below. So if you want to find out more information, you can go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/beatthelead, or you can log on to our website, casecompetition.com/BTE. And today we're very delighted to present the Boston Consulting Group. We've brought 2 consultants with us who will give you an exclusive insight into how to win a case competition. And it's something that we've given to very few universities, so we feel very privileged for having them here. So please welcome Bjørn Lund Nielsen and Mads Vedstrøm from the Boston Consulting Group.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everyone, for taking the time out this Thursday evening to spend time with us here. Especially, I've heard that the CBS Case Competition is serving free blue beer at Nexus. So happy to see that not all of you are there now. Yeah, I can see some of you drinking it back there. But we have the perfect warm-up for Nexus afterwards, especially all of you that are participating in Beat the Elite. So how to win a case competition. That's what we're going to spend the next hour and a half or so on teaching you. And it's really good to see that hopefully all of you here have already signed up for Beat the Elite. It's a great opportunity, as just mentioned. And if you haven't done so, then try to look around the room and see if there's someone you would like to spend 24 hours with solving a real-life case. And then approach that person and ask if you should put a team together after this. But who are we? So, as mentioned, my name is Bjørn Lund Nielsen. I'm a consultant at BCG. I've been there for 3.5 years now. I have a background from CBS, where I studied HI Almen and Cand.Merc. And during my time at BCG, I just counted today, I've done 16 different projects, ranging from 2 weeks, which was a pretty hectic due diligence I did in Helsinki, to 6 months, which was my longest project, where we implemented a cost management system in one of the biggest Danish companies. And then I've tried a lot of different projects in between those. My main focus has been on industrial goods and private equity. So I did my master thesis here in private equity, and I decided to continue working on that when I joined BCG. But I've actually worked in all industries and in many different countries as well. Been a lot to Singapore and in the US, and of course also in Copenhagen. One of the things I've also tried is to win the gold medal in the BCG Olympics. So BCG actually have a case competition in itself. So every 3rd year, they ask different partners in BCG to bring out their best case. So what is the case that they really think delivered the biggest value to the client? And then teams from all around the world, BCG teams, they join together and they actually present this to senior partners. And I was lucky to be a part of one of the cases that actually won the gold medal. And in case competition experiences, I've actually been a part of the Beat the Elite before. In 2010, I solved the Beat the Elite case on Tivoli, and I actually was so lucky to be in the finals, although we unfortunately did not win it. And my colleague Mads?
Yeah, thank you, Bjørn. You'll be in the finals again this year, I guess, on the other side of the panel.
Yes, I'll be one of the judges this year. So.
My name is Mads Vadstrøm, and my BCG background is a bit shorter than Bjørn's, but I think my case background is a little bit longer than Bjørn's on the case competition side, so I can tease him with that instead. I've been with BCG since the summer, working primarily within retail and consumer, and that's been with strategy, corporate development, what we call change management. So whenever a company goes through a big change in the organization, we sometimes help them with how to get through that in the best possible way. My background is also here from CBS. I'm an AF major from this summer, and I've been to the US and Canada on exchange. But my case background is probably more interesting for you at this time. So I've been a part of the case training, as also the elite team that you're supposed to beat is doing right now. So the real team that's participating in the competition next week, they're training right now, and I've been a part of that 2 years ago. And since then, I've participated in, I think, 6 competitions internationally and a bunch nationally as well. So I've been through the treadmill a few times, and the tips and tricks here today are valuable, I can tell you that. And had I just known them beforehand, it would have been great. But I learned them the hard way, and hopefully we can teach you them faster to use today. So, and then on the other side of the table, I've also written the case. So I wrote the Dong Energy case 2 years ago. So I'm also very familiar with how you sort of crack the case, what you should look for in the case. And we'll also look at the Dong Energy case today to look at what was the question there, how would we go about that. So I think it's fair to say that you cannot get more insights on the Dong Energy case than today, since you actually have one of the writers here today. So that's going to be good. On the BCG experience, you know, I had probably a much hectic start as Bjørn did when he started. So after 3 weeks into the job, I had my first CEO presentation. So I didn't sleep that much the night before that one. But also I've done more, practical things, such as doing a complete stock count in a supermarket before opening. That's a lot of products, and they open very early. So I started even earlier than that. So I think that's actually it for me now. We can go into more details about the competitions which I've participated in later, and I can show you some of the tips and tricks we used at those. So let's just dig right into it.
Yeah, perfect. So the objective today is to make you win a case competition. We have 3 key points we'll go through. First of all, we'll teach you the 4 key pillars that you need to know to win a case competition. And we'll go through all of those 4. We will bring some practical tools and tricks that you can leverage when you solve the case. And we've brought with us a lot of different examples of real case competitions that we have done or some of our colleagues have done. When I prepared for this presentation, I looked through my Beat the Elite Tivoli deck to find some powerful, great, amazing slides that I could bring. And I was pretty amazed of how terrible those slides that I did 4 years ago actually were. So I've only brought one, and I've hidden it somewhere deep in the deck, because they're actually not very good. But that just shows how much you can learn and how much practice actually matters. So it's great that you're here, and hopefully you can learn a lot of things that make you better. But the 4 key pillars that we will walk through are these 4. So how to win a case competition? Well, first of all, you need to structure your work effectively, and Mads will talk a lot about that. You need to create a compelling story that you can convey to the judges. You need to collect the data and make sure that you quantify your findings. And you need to be sure to communicate what you've actually found in a clear way. So those are the 4 key pillars. And of course, under all that is a team composition and practice. So it's always good to have a team that complement each other. So one guy can be the financial guy with the Excel model, and one could be more the creative one that can figure out the marketing strategy, and so on. So those 4 pillars are the ones we will go through. And Mads, you will start with
Yeah.
the first one.
Perfect. Yes. And I'm glad they started out by saying that this is a workshop and not a presentation, because really feel free to ask questions also along the way. I'll make sure to keep us on time and cut you off if you're either speaking too much or asking questions that I cannot answer. So don't worry about that. But please do feel free to be interactive. And also, if I ask a question, it's definitely not a rhetorical question, so please also do answer those so we can spare the awkward silence from those questions. So structure your work effectively and be efficient in problem solving is very important, but it's even more important when we have 24 hours. So basically what we'll go through is our method of 5 steps to effective problem solving. And you know, this is what we do every day. So it's not just for case competition, it's also great practice in everything you do. So first of all, start by defining what you have to answer. So find the central question in the case. That can be very straightforward, as you'll see in just a bit in the Dong Energy case. It can also be hidden and more indirect post. Second, decompose that question. So most likely it'll not be a yes or no answer. I'll give you that much help for the case next week. So you have to decompose that into more simple questions which you actually have a better chance of answering. That's the second part. And then we'll skip the third a little bit because you won't really dig into doing heavy analyses. Of course you'll do some, but we'll identify the tasks and how much time you should spend on each on actually answering these questions. Because of course, when you only have 24 hours, your work will be very, what we call hypothesis driven. And of course, very, very few data points are needed to confirm or deny any statements. So basically what you'll learn here is that a simple Google search can actually bring you many answers which you need for the case competition. And then it's about making it look good afterwards. And then finally, and that's also a point we'll skip a little bit today, because in 24 hours you don't have time to do and iterate. But in real life, that's what we do. So the first hour and a half is spent on figuring out what's the question and how do we solve it. And then the rest of the 6 to 12 week project is doing the same questions over and over and over again until we find the best answer for that. And I'll show you the technique today. So let's jump right into it. How many of you have read the Dong Energy case? Thank God there's 1, 2. Great. You don't need to read it, but if you do, you'll see that the last page actually looks like that, or at least some of it does. So the question in the Dong Energy case was very, very straightforward post, but not straightforward to answer. So there's some blue bold text. We didn't hid it from anyone. It was, how can Dong Energy leverage its portfolio of technologies and partnerships to profitably lead the next revolution in the energy sector, providing a clean yet reliable energy supply? And as I said before, not a yes or no answer. So let's go in and say, how would you solve this question? And again, not a rhetorical question. How would you go about it? Any ideas? Awkward silence. Yeah.
Do some industry analysis.
Do some industry analysis. What would you look for?
This current structure of the industry.
Okay.
What's moving?
Yeah.
How the growth rates.
Growth rates within what?
Different sectors.
If you type in energy sector, do you know how many growth rates you'll find? A lot. So that's, especially for the Dong Energy case, this was really important. Using a framework such as this. So defining what's the central question, that was pretty straightforward. So far, so good. Then pulling that into different sub-questions, or what we call issues, saying, well, if we need to grow profitably within the energy sector, we probably need to shelve that into different segments of the energy sector, and so on. But before we go into the Dong Energy case, let's start with something a little bit more simple and use the framework so you get a grasp of it. So because this, from here, you're probably not ready to solve the case just yet. But let's try and use the framework and imagine yourself a retailer. So it's a bit closer to our normal environment. And this retailer has the question, how can profits be increased? So that's probably a bit more straightforward, but still, that could be split into how can turnover be increased or how can we decrease costs? Okay? See how I go from a profit question to actually 2 levers that both answer the same question. So if I increase turnover, yes, profit goes up. If I decrease costs, profit will also go up. And then I can begin to further dig down and say, how can we increase turnover? And here we can say, well, I can either have a higher customer base, have more customers coming to my store, or I can get the customers that do come to come more often, or I can get the customers that do come to spend more when they come. So already now we're going from profit down here to turnover, and all of these three levers will all increase turnover in three different ways. But they're all answering the same question: how can profits be increased? And down here we're getting to a level on saying, then we can come up with specific, either break it further down or come up with specific initiatives that can actually increase, as we say here, the basket size, or increase how many customers we have come. Does that make sense? So really breaking down the questions, hopefully down to a level where the questions become quite straightforward, or you can begin to see specific analyses you can do and specific initiatives. And that will make your solution much better. A key term we use down here is we need to be mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. What do you mean about that? So and that's a very hard thing to do every time, but you should strive for it when you try and do these hypothesis trees. What it means is that there are only these three ways of increasing turnover. So all of your initiatives will fall into one of these three. Why is that a huge advantage? Because if you know you have all of these three, and you know you're MECE, it means there is not a fourth box you've forgotten about. You know that if you tried out these three, you have the entire solution space. And it both shows to the judges, yes, I've covered all the bases. I've sort of analyzed which lever is probably best to go for, and then it's much better for you to dig into one of them, because the judges will then know, you do know what all of the drivers are, but you do dig into the one that's probably most relevant for the case. That will allow you to become much more specific in your analysis without going too deep, too fast, because you do show the overview. And at all levels, this MECE concept can be applied. So again, there are only two ways in a very broad sense to increase profits, and that's through turnover and cost. So breaking that down into more and more specific issues is the way to go forward. Now let's try and go back to Dong. So a way of doing it here, and I won't bore you with the energy details, even though we could, and we would keep you away from the free beers for way too long. But again, going from these issues, so they have to leverage their portfolio of reliable energy. Well, at least two ways to go. First of all, they can grow within existing business areas. Okay, so using existing technologies within existing business areas. Another way could be existing technologies within new business areas. And can you sort of see what the next box would be? New technologies within existing business areas. New technologies within new business areas. 4 boxes, and then I know I have all the bases covered across. And then you can very quickly do an analysis saying, I'll probably dig into this one. I'll show you in just a bit. Why? Because they have more knowledge within that. The market seems to grow faster and all of these things. But get to that level first. And then when you get to that level, we dig down even further and saying, how can we grow within wind power, or within biomass, or within oil, and all of these things, listing up all the different existing business areas. The next key is then going from issues to hypotheses. So hypotheses are answers. So very quickly, and when I say very quickly, I mean almost within the first 2 hours of the competition, you should have your first answer. You should be able to say, Dong Energy should build more windmills. That should be the answer right off the bat. You might be smarter 20 minutes later, but you definitely don't want to wait until the 23rd hour to figure out your question, because your answer, that leaves you only 1 hour in the end to actually do the analysis. So rather do a good analysis, and maybe you haven't done exactly the right road from the beginning, but pick a road and go for it. So here, there is no way that you can know whether wind or oil or biomass would have been the best way to go with Dong. And I can also right now tell you it wouldn't have mattered, because the case team who won didn't choose the right way in terms of what Dong had in mind, or probably also what was the right way in general, but they did the best analysis on the way they did, and on the road they went. So actually, the quicker you can go from these issues, so what are the questions in the case, to hypotheses, possible answers, the more you can prioritize, and the deeper you can get in your analyses, the more you can show. So when you've gone from the hypothesis trees, you sort of see where you want to put your research time, where you want to put your efforts. So when you have your tree laid out, you sort of have asked the right questions. You then take the right questions and try to get to the right answers by saying, what would I need of data, of interviews, of statements, or whatever, to either say I'm right or I'm wrong in these statements. And then you define for each hypothesis, it's a very formal way of saying it, but you define for each thing you think is right, what do I need of data, who do I need to ask, what kind of research do I do, and then you take these tasks and plan them together and say, does it make sense that we spend 18 hours finding out whether the market grows by 9 or 8%? No, because we only have 24 hours. So after you have your full list of tasks, you go to the project plan and says, what does it make sense to look at from a time perspective? And then you're off. And this is why it is so critical that you start fast. This is how 24 hours look. And you're probably not surprised, but you will probably be surprised if you draw it out, and especially after the competition, if you draw out what you actually spend your time on. That's probably the best exercise, especially if you go on to other competitions. So here, we have laid out a potential timeline of how it could look, and actually this is one I followed in one of my later case competitions, in a 24-hour competition. So the first part was spent on reading, then discussing, research, drawing up slides, work, a little bit of sleep, work, and then rehearse, and then hand it. There are 3 points in this timeline I want to draw out to you. 3 critical points. The first one is critical point number 1. What do you think is critical about that point in time in your case competition? After about 3 hours, what do you really want to have at this point? Discussions are important, but you must, at this point, begin to draw up slides and come up with your analyses, come up with your answers. So, a winning trait of any winning case team is very often that they stop discussing quite fast and then move into output mode. That's tip number 1 on this timeline. Tip number 2, work status. That's don't make it into a discussion club, but don't make it into a silo thinking team either. So keep your team always aligned and on track. So say, every hour we take a 5-minute update. People just quickly go through what they've done the past hour, and then you move on. Okay? So you still agree on the overall direction, but it might be that 2 of you are working on the same thing, or one of you just found a data source that another one could use as well. So frequent updates, but really be sure that you also get your work done and not turn it into a discussion club. Critical point number 3, and that's what Bjørn will go much more into in just a second. That's remember to sense check your storyline. Because in a team, you will most likely see that after, and that's what many teams see after 22 or 23 hours, that you have the 10 slides you need, but there are 10 separate slides. So they don't move in one direction, starting out with a story, telling a full story all the way through, and then rounding off. So please leave time in the end. It shouldn't give you any questions or issues in the end, because of course you are aligned and updated all the way through. But do leave time to just looking through the slides and does your story make sense? And whether your story makes sense, those checks, Bjørn will go through right now in the storyline section.
Thanks a lot. So that was very quick on how to dissect the problem into easier boxes to solve. And of course, it may sound easy when you hear it here in 15 minutes, but of course, it's always difficult when you try it. But remember to think about when you get a problem to put it into different issues and not just see it as one big problem. Then what I'm going to talk about is how to then storyline what your findings. So now you've done your analysis, you've figured out what the key issue is, and now you know and you figured out kind of what you want to recommend. So what do you need to do to get a very good storyline? So a storyline is 3 different things. First of all, it needs to be logical. So you need to have a story that makes sense. So all your slides should fit into a correct order. It needs to be compelling. So you need to say something that relates to the audience, something that makes them involved in your story, and something that they can actually feel something for and not just fall asleep. And you need to think about your audience. So who are you actually talking to? So in this case, you'll be talking to top executives. So you shouldn't go into too much small details, but you focus on the big picture and the big, where the big value is for the top executives. So remember these things when you do your story. The normal way that we are taught to make a story, every time we make an assignment here at CBS, we do it like a conventional story mode. So we start out with the issue, then we do some analysis, we do some discussions, we found some issues, and then in the end we come up with a conclusion. This is like a fairy tale story. When you do a case competition, you need to do it in a very different way. You need to build your story into clear silos. So there are 4 key steps to a good story. First of all, you should lay out the situation. So what is the current background? What's the case? How does it look like? What is then the problem? So what is the key issue that you have identified? What is your solution to the issue? And what are the implications? So if they follow your recommendation, what would that mean for the company? So those 4 key boxes are the ones you should build your story around. And here's an example of the 2 different ways of telling a story. So the first one, this is your example of a recommendation. Some say the industry is attractive, but it is difficult to tell. The competitive position is probably good. I think you should consider what to do, even though I think you might buy if you agree that the NPV is positive. So what's wrong with this way to tell a story? Yeah?
The solution is pretty weak. You said, I think you might, whereas it should be you should, or like, should be very strong.
Yeah, there's no clear recommendation. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the key thing is there's no clear recommendation, and the second thing is that it's pretty difficult to read as an audience. So an alternative is this one here. Buy, industry is attractive, competitive position is solid, valuation shows positive NPV and robustness. So this is the way to build a story. Start out with a clear recommendation so the audience knows what do you want to tell them. Do you want to tell them buy or do you want to tell them sell? They shouldn't wait until the end to know if you are buying or selling. And 3 or 4 clear points on why you say buy. So you have to, of course, to build your argument for why you give your recommendation. To build a story is very much linked to what Mads told about the problem and doing the issue tree. So as Mads said, when you do your work, your analysis, you start with the problem and you dissect it into different issues. Then when you have all your issues, you hopefully have a recommendation as well. And the recommendation is the one you start with when you tell your story. So your story should be one clear recommendation, and then you should have different sections that argues why you've chosen that solution. So often when you do a case competition, you might see that there are 2 ways to go. Either you can focus on your home market, or you can focus on expanding to China or whatever. And instead of arguing for both when you solve the case, try to stick with one and then have all the arguments that build your case for that one. Instead of saying, on the one hand, you can go to China, and on the other hand, you can just focus on your home market, just stick with the one story you want, and then make sure that you build that story, and then try to forget that you saw all the arguments to support your other story. And you can save those ones to the risk section if you want to. So this is a case example. This is often the way how you should start your story. So always start the story with your recommendation. So have an executive summary in the beginning that tells what you're going to tell them. So this is one example where you have a situation clearly stated. You have the question that you want to answer, and you have your answers to the right. So this should be your first or your second slide after your front page. So you really set the stage. And there's a saying that whenever you solve or present a case, you should tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell it, then tell what you just told them. So start with your recommendation, tell why you told them why that's your recommendation, and then finish off by telling your recommendation again. to make sure that they understand what you're actually telling them. And when you build your story, or you try to come up with your story, so you've done your analysis, you know what recommendation you want to do, try to find a good way to tell your story. So this is an example from another case competition where they used a catchphrase to build their story around. So they have a catchphrase that says, enable, engage, and expand. And you see the first slide, they have the issue, complication, question, answer as their second slide, so setting the stage. And then the whole presentation, they build up on these enable, engage, expand. So a 3-step strategy. So instead of just saying, oh, we have 3 things you should do, then they build it around this pretty easy to remember catchphrase. That's a good way to make the judges remember you and make you stand out. So try to think of that when you build your story. Can we have some kind of good logic to our story? Maybe, a catchphrase or something that makes it more than just a big story that flows together. And one key thing also when you do your story, if you cannot tell your story in less than 30 seconds, then it's not a good story. So I remember the first case training I did, we had 5 different recommendations for the company. So we wanted to say, you should do this, and you should do this. So we had 5 different things. And the judges were just, okay, we have no clue what you're telling us because you want to go in all different directions. So instead, be very clear in your recommendation, choose one step, and then build your story for that. So always, when you build your story, try to test each other. So, okay, what are we telling the judges? What's the story? And if you cannot come up with that answer in 20 to 25 seconds, then maybe rethink your story. And this is one other case example. So the question is, what should be the direction of SAS till 2015? Answer, increase utilization. So maybe this is overly simple. Well, it is overly simple, but that's the one key message. It's not you should increase utilization, you should have better food on your planes, you should paint your seats red. It's one clear recommendation. And of course, then you should build arguments for why, and also how can you do this. So of course, not enough to say you should increase utilization, but you should also say how should they do it, so the implications of this. So to sum up, a normal storyline in a case competition is these 5 and 6 steps. Start with the executive summary, so telling them what you're going to tell them. Set the stage. What is the situation? What is it we are going to answer? How are we going to answer this? So what is the solution framework? How are we going to go around solving this problem? Then what is the solution, or solutions if you have more? Then have some kind of impact, so what are the financial implications of this solution, and that's what Mads is going to go through in a second. And then finish off with the next steps and timeline. And then in the end you can sum it all up and clearly state your recommendation again in the end. Any questions to the storyline part? Yes?
How many slides will you use on each of these, the executive summary and all the other stuff?
So, of course, it depends on how much time you have, but a normal...
Like counting slides.
Sorry?
Counting slides, like you have a limited to 10 slides there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one for the executive summary, one front page, and then you can kind of divide how many slides you need for each, but probably around 1 or 2 slides. So 1 slide for the situation, maybe 2 or 3 slides for the solution framework and for the solution. 1 impact slide with some financials on it, and 1 slide summing it all up. So that will probably be around there. But of course, it depends on how you put your solution together. Yes?
Just a quick comment to that. For Beat the Lead, for example, then you have to hand in 10 PowerPoint slides and 1 executive summary.
Okay.
So there's a limit for it.
But if you only have enough, you have a story that fills 8 slides, and then try to make 2 slides just to make it fill in, then focus on doing 8 great slides instead of doing 10 not so great slides.
Just trying to lowering your job. Yeah. Use your 10 slides. Great. So the first two sections we just went through now are quite abstract and quite conceptual in the sense that practice makes perfect. So the more you try these hypothesis-driven thinking and the more you try and storyline your slides, the better you'll become. So if this is going to be your first time with no practice, you're not going to be great. Okay? But you can definitely get there. So there are no barriers between you and just practicing on doing this again and again and again. So remembering, before that I presented something, actually I have some slides in here that I almost didn't dare take to you, but that was my 5th or my 6th case competition. The first and my second, I wouldn't even dare present here. I would get laughed out of the room. So we all start at the point where we probably missed all the steps we just went through. And even sometimes today, on the job, we still miss some of the steps sometimes. Okay? So really, practice makes perfect. In this section, collect data and quantify your findings. That's your stronghold as academics. So I'm not going to tell you, these are the 10 key analyses you should do. They wouldn't make sense. This is where you're probably better than many of the judges that are going to actually evaluate your findings. Because you know all the analysis to show insight. You know which numbers you need to dig out. You know how you do them in the spreadsheet and all of those things. I am not 1 second in doubt about that. But how you structure them and how you present them, that's where you can use a bit of assistance. At least from what I've seen earlier in the BCG competitions. So that's what I'm going to do in this collect data and quantify your findings. So that's mainly going to be looking at a slide such as this, and I'm going to give you, let's say, 10 to 15 seconds, just so you can, capture your own thoughts before I start telling you what I think about this slide. There are good things, there are bad things. But I will show you some insights on how I and my team and other teams in the past have presented really complex slides. So if you think that for the Beat the Elite competition you should do these Steve Jobs kind of slides with one number, you can do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. Your slides, since you only have 10 slides, will be a little bit more packed than usual, and that's fine. And I'm telling you this because it doesn't fit into our story that your slides should be crisp, and Bjørn will tell you later, one message per slide. But from history, it just tells me that the winners are packing their slide with information. But they're not packing the slides in a way that is not easy to present, and the reader doesn't very quickly get a grasp of what the slide says. So let's look at this slide. You need to show you understand the opportunities. So this is a market sizing slide that actually in one slide goes from the total market of households in the US down to how many would actually begin considering using a TV app in one slide. And what it does, it simply shows all the assumptions step by step, going through it, going from one number to the next all the time, making it very visible what kind of assumption it uses. So it has two great advantages. The story, you can actually get by you get the answer from reading the header, but just reading these lines right here, you get the entire story. So if you actually believe that, no reason to dig into the graphs. You don't need the graphs for getting information. But the graphs, and that's the second part of the good thing of this slide, they show that you've done your analysis carefully. They show your methodology, and they show you really know your stuff. So packing your slides is great, but always remember, keep the story clear and presentable. And there are many ways. Here it's been done by using 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll see some other examples later on. This is another way, visualizing it very clearly. So remember, both for Beat the Elite competition, but just in general, people who evaluate your material will have very, very little time per slide they look at. So by using graphics, you can very quickly relate the information to what they actually have in their heads. So right here, we're looking at revenue drivers and cost drivers, and we see we have 3 different demographic groups, and we're looking at our assumptions on the different demographics and comparing them to the revenue base, what we're actually adding up with. And down here we have the cost per platform, using logos to keep it a little bit more light, using people to show the team how it's going to increase over time, and all of these things. Keeping it very visually, you can actually still have a very, very packed slide. But just remember, very simple stuff as using dividers out here, show the structure of the slide, and using arrows direct the vision of the eye on the slide. Very, very small tricks to present very, very condensed information. But always remember, you should keep a very, very simple story visible for the reader. So he within 10 seconds knows what do you want to do with this slide. If he trusts us, he can just move on. This is another slide saying this is packed with information. There are 64 Harvey balls on here. And each Harvey ball can rank from 1 to 5. That's 300 possible data points in one slide. But very quickly, by using circles and numbers, we relate to the information saying you can look at any one of the 64 Harvey balls if you want to, but the 3 I want you to look at, or the 3 areas, are these 3. And why? It says right out here. And in the header, we very quickly say, well, if you don't get anything what's going on down here, you should know this one thing. You should get content-specific features, whatever that means. So really keep your storyline as straight as possible using either these headers and also boxes down in the end. You can have a second story running down there. And then as much as possible, structure your information and clearly mark where you want the reader to focus. Yeah?
How much time do you have per presentation? You said you have around 10 slides, but how much time do you have? Because I thought maybe you would risk getting like kind of locked in one slide because the judges didn't understand it, and then you wouldn't have enough time for the rest of the presentation.
Well, the judges cannot interrupt you during your presentation, so you can control that, at least until that hasn't changed, right?
No, exactly. So you get 10 minutes to present, and then 10 minutes for question and answers.
So how I would present this slide would be, I want to leave you with one message. Your features on your app should be content specific. I go more into depth with what that means in just a second. And we can always return to this in the Q&A, but there are 3 areas I'd like to point out, and these are 1, 2, 3. So in less than a minute, we can go through the slide. But it's a hard slide to present, no doubt. So how do you actually get ahead in this data race? So you all have the same fundamentals in terms of which analyses you can build on, but in the case competition, what we find the best way to get information is through analyst reports. It has a wealth of information on the industry, and you can actually show true insight by reading a few of these on the industry, if it's covered, of course. But for example, for Dong Energy, if you picked up a few of these on the energy sector, which is definitely covered by the banks, you could, in 3 or 4 pages, get an expert view on how the energy sector looks. And you can actually, after an hour, pretty much sound like an expert, even without knowing a clue about energy before you start. So that's a quick way to get ahead. Besides these reports, these are some of the sources that I and other teams in the past have told me they have used. So just going through them, and of course it's not exhaustive at all, so please use all the databases you also have access to here at CBS. You almost, I have learned that the hard way, you actually have better data than us sometimes when you have to research. So I would actually love to come back to the CBS database once in a while. So you have an immense amount of data. But the important thing is you should know what you have access to before you start a competition. So really know, well, for country data, I have Euromonitor and Eurostat. So you don't start spending 30 minutes on finding GDP data. You should spend 30 seconds on finding GDP data. And again, also, being good at using Google by using these prefixes in the end, or suffixes. If you use this one down here, it only searches for PDF files. And that's what the reports are stored in. So that's very quickly, lets you use Google in a very efficient way. So now we're coming down to the part where the don'ts of the do's and don'ts part. So here is a perfect example of a very crowded slide where we have no way of knowing what they want us to focus on. So there's a really bad case that can happen, and there's a bad but less bad case that could happen. So the really bad case is that the reader of this slide do not get what you're saying. So he doesn't know what to take away from it, he moves on. That's a slide lost, and that's a lot out of 10 slides. But also another bad thing could be that he draws a different conclusion than you did. So what if you from this slide say, we should definitely go into Croatia? And the reader says, no, it's Slovakia, that's the next place. And then when he sees the next slide saying Croatia is going to grow by X%, he's going to be like, but why didn't you pick Slovakia? So please point out what do you want us to focus on. It's great to show depth, but always really highlight what information they need to take away from the slide. So be simple is extremely important. So this is a very, very simple slide, but what do you think is wrong here? Yeah?
Yeah, you only change one variable in what you did, so you have 3 hockey sticks on top of each other.
Exactly. So this is what we call a regular hockey stick, and that's when I see all your presentations here next week, I do not want to see one. Okay? This is a turn off right from the bat in the financial sections. So this means that you've simply extrapolated the data, and everyone knows that. Okay? So please, whatever you do, fix your data so it bends off at the end. Always do that. And it's a very, very simple fix, and you should, of course, based on the right assumptions, etc., but seeing this alarms everyone that you haven't spent enough time in your financial state analysis. You may have not, but please make it harder for me to find out that you haven't.
Yeah, and also make sure that the worst case, not a case where you make 10 times as much as you do today. So then it's not a worst case, really.
Exactly. So what we do expect from your presentations is this business sensing. So actually, understanding and not just showing us data from a spreadsheet. And that's also the final part here, that you can load the presentations with data and we'll be impressed, but we'll be even more impressed when you show understanding. So this, I've taken the liberty of calling a killer slide, and I'll show you why in just a second. But this was one slide out of, I think, 120 slides in the presentation. It doesn't have one data point on. It's only from, I don't think you can see it down here, but it's from The Guardian. So The Guardian made an article on how TV had, developed over time. What we did with this slide, we simply took it and said, well, what do we see of trends? Looking at the simple information from a news article, we saw that viewers are still demanding the same interaction forms, but it can be delivered in different ways. That was a key insight that no data from no source could have showed us. It was simply from an article in The Guardian. So they were really impressed with this true insight, and out of a deck on 120 pages, we brought it on page 4. So right off the bat, we showed this industry, we got it covered, and we used no data at all. So please focus on understanding and storyline that understanding rather than filling your slides with data. Any questions to sum up the data? Hard? No? Great. Or we can also sum up with questions in the end,
Yeah.
if you think of any.
But definitely key takeaway is use data. Do quantify your recommendation. There's nothing worse than a perfect story where you have the right answer, but then you finish off with just saying, it's a good idea, and not saying you can earn X amount of dollars more. So you need some kind of quantification behind your recommendation. Good. The last section is about how you communicate your findings clearly. And basically, there are 2 different things to a strong presentation. There is that you have the right content. So good content is a lot of what Matt showed, so a lot of good data on the slides. It's also where you have clear messages, so headings that make sense and where you can read the heading and actually understand what you're telling them. It's, of course, that it's relevant to the audience, and it's also that there's some kind of call to action. So there's a recommendation and there's a next step for the judges. You also need a strong structure. If you have a good story and you follow those 5 or 6 steps in your presentation, then you would probably have a good structure. But just make sure that also your slides, they kind of stick together, so that the heading of the one slide kind of follows with the next slide, so it's just not 2 completely different things. And also the other part is the delivery. So when you get invited to the finals, you're one in 5 teams, and you get to stand down in front of top executives. It's of course a good thing that you're not shaking or nervous or looking down on the floor or speaks too quietly. So we'll have a bit about delivery as well, so about voice and body language. Basically, as I just said, strong content is clear and actionable messages on all your slides. So where you focus on your titles, often titles are the only thing that the judges will see, especially if you have a lot of data on your slide. So make sure the title says what you want to say with the slide. And also make sure that the title makes sense with what you have on your slide. So you kind of follow, you shouldn't say something on your title that then is not shown at all on the slide. So make sure there's a fit there. And make sure you have the logic sequence of slides, as just mentioned. But also, those are the things those are the table stakes. Those things you need to have. The other thing is that you should somehow try to make your slides or your story compelling. So try a way to spice up your story a bit. These are a few ways you could do it. So first one is help your audience believe. And that's a lot back to the data. So you can say, well, you should, SAS, you should increase your utilization. Yeah, sure. Show me how. Show me some data points. Show me how I can do it. So leverage the data. Use statistics, facts. You can also use different quotes. Just somehow build up your story. The other one is help your audience remember. So use some graphics, use humor. Humor is always good to make you stand out. Metaphors, always great, or the repeat punchlines, the engage, expand one I mentioned before. Help your audience interact. It's always good that you provoke some kind of feeling in your audience, make them agree with you or disagree with you, or make them think, ask them a rhetorical question, somehow make them engaged instead of sitting and sleeping. And one thing also, the last thing, try to make them be moved. Try to tell a personal story, come with some personal example. If it's a company where you've used the products yourself, try to talk about when you were 5 years old and you got this product yourself and how you've always bought it since then, or try to bring something in that's personal and make you stand out and not just be a technical presentation. Of course, this is not easy. It's what makes the team win. If you are one of 150 Beat the Elite presentations that are going to be sent in, well, the judges will look for something that makes you stand out and not just a generic recommendation and story. So try to always think about this when you solve your case. Try to push yourself. Am I actually telling something new? Am I telling something that the other 149 aren't telling here? And we have a few examples on how that potentially could be done. So one way is to open strong. So you have a first page that is up to you to spend it any way you want. One way is to bring in a metaphor or a picture of sorts. So this is, again, the Disney case, where they were thinking about using an app. They were very nervous about apps moving in. They have it, and they have the content and not really focused on everything around the content. But here, a clear message: content is still king. Your move. So very focused on action, saying, okay, you are the king, and it's your move. You can kind of drive the direction. And also there's the metaphor within the king in chess and the moving of the king. So a metaphor and a call to action within the first page with a simple statement and a picture. So instead of just having some kind of boring front page, try to think if you can spice it up in any way and use a metaphor or picture that kind of follows the story you're going to tell. Another way to do it is to use quotes. This is one that I often used. So some quote that the audience can remember, and that is true to what you're telling them. Of course, don't put a quote up there if it has no relevance at all to what you're saying. But if you can find a really strong quote that gives your message, then definitely use it. But yeah, of course, be careful, because it can also, some judges might feel it's a bit strange or a bit soft that you have that you start off with a quote. But often it can make you stand out as well. Then we have a slide like this. Selected prosperous markets. Is this a good or bad slide? Any comments on this slide? Show of hands, how many would use this slide in their presentation? Okay. So I would say this is not the best of slides. And this is back to having titles that tell you something and have content on the slide that stands out and provides a clear message to the audience. This one, I have no idea what they're telling me. So they have some industries on the left and they have some graphs on the right. But I don't have this takeaway. So always remember, when you have your slide, make sure your title says something actionable or clever, and make sure the content is actionable and makes sense. And this one doesn't really tell me anything. Then there's a slide like this one. Is this better? Is it worse? Any comments on this one? No. So I would say it's definitely better. It's maybe not perfect, but it's definitely much better. It says 3 key trends define the future US media market. So it's a pretty clear title, because you can see the 3 bullets. You have the 3 bullets that are linked to the title. So okay, there are 3 key trends, and I can read the box on the left and then see what they are. A better way to do it, because it is a pretty text-heavy slide, a better way to do it could be to state the 3 trends in the title and say trend 1, trend 2, trend 3, define the future market. Because then the audience could just look at the title and then they don't have to look for information on the slide. But the good thing here is that you can see there are data on the right, so it seems like these 3 trends are actually backed by some information. It's not just some trends that are stated. So this slide, it has the content that backs the claim, and in the title you can pretty much read what you're going to say. Then we have a slide here. This is actually a very interesting slide. So in BCG we have a case competition together with Novozymes that's called Doing Business In, where every year we have a student trip for 2 weeks where Novozymes and BCG, they take 30 students to a country somewhere. This was from last year's presentation where I got to go as the BCG representative. And we were in India. And so the case was, what should Novozymes' future strategy be in India? And we had 30 students and six case teams. And this was actually the slide that won the case competition. So what I want to say here is that the thing about standing out and having something that the other groups, they don't have. So this was an amazing analysis done by the team that no one else really had seen. So the other 5 teams, they had pretty good solutions. It was maybe a bit generic. They were like kind of the same direction they wanted to go. But then this group, they just somehow found out or looked at the market and saw this huge opportunity within the ethanol business. So they analyzed the Novozymes and then their 4 key competitors in the production of enzymes to ethanol. And they looked through all the different products. So they listed here on the bottom all the key products that these 5 players have. And then they saw that Novozymes is the only player that have products within the full value chain of how you produce ethanol. So first of all, to do that analysis, you need to know how the ethanol value chain is. That's not the easiest thing to know. and you need to go and look into all the different companies and figure out what products do they actually have and what can these products do. So it was like the DTU person that did this slide, but that's fair enough. And then they found out this great thing, and then they used it to come up with a great recommendation. So Novozymes could leverage this, and they could sell a bundled product to the industry. So they could bundle their 4 different products and then sell a complete solution to the ethanol producers. And this was a great insight that no one in Novozymes had thought about. So really a way to try to really strive to find this solution that is different from all the other ones. It's of course easier said than done, but try to push yourself in finding something that's not just a generic solution. And then of course also find a good way to illustrate it here. So we have the logos and you have the value chain and make it illustrative and make it stand out. Also, when you present and you have your content, you should have a timeline in the end. Have a next step section. So what should the company do Monday morning? And this is the one example of how you could do it. So pretty clearly state, well, there are 3 next steps. Right now, 2011, you need to focus on China, as you normally do. Second step is then go into Korea, and then you have a 3rd step. So a pretty easy way to tell, okay, what should you do now? So of course you have a great recommendation, you have the great analysis, but how should you make this, how should you realize this strategy? So always put in a timeline in the end. And then my one theory slide. So this is an example of how you can finish off. So when you've given all your great recommendations, you've told your story, you should always finish off and kind of summing everything up and telling your recommendation again. And this is one way to do it, to kind of put all the slides, all the analysis you've done before, and put that into the final and 10th slide. So saying, okay, we went through a lot of analysis, we've talked about the recommendation, we've shown you the implications, so we should be the winner. And on this slide, we also have we came up with a quote, or we used a quote back then. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but at least that's how we kind of build our story. We had a quote in the beginning, and we used it to say, okay, you need to reinvent some things in theory, you need to expand some things, you need to rebuild things. And then there was a pretty good quote from the founder of Theory that we could use for that. And the other 9 slides, they are pretty ugly and bad, but this one is okay to show. Good. The other part of it is the delivery. And this, we have one simple slide on. It's a bit about body language and using your voice. Some are just naturally better at presenting, but these are some tips and tricks you could use. First of all, think about eye contact. Try to, instead of looking down, try to look at your audience. And especially when you have 4 judges at BD, try to make sure you have eye contact with all of them. The second one is to the right, using your voice. Remember not to talk too fast. Don't talk too slow either, but try to keep a natural pace. Use pitch, so if there's a clear conclusion, try to add some drama, some excitement when you tell that. If there's call to action, also try to change your pitch. Power, speak clear, of course, and loud. Try not to whisper so no one can hear you, but speak up. And also remember to use pauses. Don't just talk into one fast stream, but use pauses effectively. Facial expressions look approachable. Try not to look too happy or too sad, but try to look pretty neutral. And of course, look as what you're telling. So if you're telling them to fire half of their people, don't laugh. And if you're telling them something, you have this great opportunity, they don't look too sad. So try to balance that. And then posture movement. don't try to walk around too much. Try to stand pretty firmly and talk. Yeah. So basically, some tips and tricks to use. And of course, there's also practice makes perfect. So the more you present, the less nervous you become, and the better you can leverage these different tips and tricks. Good. So that was 1 hour rundown of the tips and tricks on how to win a case competition. Now please bring out your questions.
Yeah, where's the difference between the last slide or the concluding slide that we showed and the solution framework? Because to me it seems that the content is very similar.
So the solution framework and
The slide you just showed with the recommendation or the concluding remarks, because there you also again have the situation and the recommendation and the implications.
yeah, so you don't really tell all those 3 things. You just have that slide in the background saying, okay, we've done all this great analysis, and then you just say in like maybe 30 seconds, you just state your key recommendation again. Or you maybe refer back to whatever front page you had a metaphor or a quote. You kind of try to build it all around and tie the knot. So you don't talk to the points there, you just have it up there, like giving like a wow feeling, saying we did all this. Any other questions?
Do you have any advice for solving disagreements as in such case competitions you have a limited amount of time?
Yes. Two main recommendations. One, pick a dispute solver, or you can also call it a team leader. So you don't have to have a designated team leader, but agree on who is timekeeper. So the most important thing is time, so who will keep you on track in terms of that. So it's totally fine for that person to say, now we stop discussing. And then the second part is put it behind you and take the longer discussion after the competition. So of course, and I've been in many competitions where we had a few grudges built up through the 24 hours, and then we had to solve them afterwards. But that was totally all right. So of course, you may not be best friends in the 23rd hour, but in the 25th, you can start repairing that. That would be my main recommendation, actually.
If we have no further questions, please just give a big applause to Mads Wåström and Bjørn Lund Wilson. Thank you.